Hey y'all, hope you're doing well today. So today's message is going to come from the book Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and we're actually going into part 4 of chapter 2 called Atonement with the Father. Atonement with the Father. And this was something I kind of had to think on for a little bit. And it's actually a fairly long section within chapter 2, and so I'm going to be skipping a lot. And again, if this is interesting to you, I just encourage you to get the book to dive into it a little bit deeper on your own. But I'm going to hit all the highlights for you today. Okay, so to kind of set our minds in the right place to absorb the meaning. It's kind of like we're putting on some lenses, it's so that we can be prepared to frame everything that we take in today from the right perspective. Because I don't even know that you would say the right perspective. I feel like there's so much. Whenever you endeavor to get something out of a really complex topic, I think that you can get multiple realizations or draw multiple conclusions from the same topic depending on whatever lens you have on at the time, and so I'll just share with you what came to me and how this is relevant for sharpening our discernment and getting clarity with regards to how manipulative people work and like what their motivations are. Not that we want to spend a lot of time focused on those people. We don't have to be experts. We have a life to live, and we don't want to, live dwelling in the past and focused on the past. But I think that getting a really good understanding of things a little bit along the way is just going to help us, like I said, with refining our discernment and knowing how to correctly construct that armor, right? Whenever we come across manipulation in the future. So I want to start off the conversation today, the discussion today, by pointing out that, young children like toddlers, they have a particular mindset that's kind of cute, it can be kind of frustrating at times for parents, and it's essentially the mindset that they expect everything to go their way. They expect everything to be perfect, quote unquote. And this is where you could take this down this rabbit hole if you wanted. I think it was in the last presentation I gave with reference to the symbolism of the mother and how I guess you might say through the lens of archetypal psychology, maybe. This dynamic between an infant and the mother is so supposedly impactful on our psyche, like on a sub or an unconscious level, that it's something that has been of great interest to a lot of researchers throughout history. I think that Sigmund Freud was actually one who came up with a lot of theories with regards to that. So that's something you can look into. But I'm just going to kind of gloss over the relation to that today, and that is essentially that I think what is implied, especially in the last sections we reviewed in the book, is that, and I mentioned it to you all as well, children kind of idealize their parents, and I guess maybe the mother in particular is kind of like they don't view the parents or the mother realistically. They don't see the bad aspects, and so it's like they live in this fantasy land, right? This fairy tale place of bliss that a good parent is going to help them ease into reality, right? And to see that that's not exactly in alignment with the actual world, right? And so it's kind of like a process of maturing the psyche that we all have to go through, and I think that most of us grow out of that, but there are some people who don't, and it's like as an example, toddlers, they can get fixated on something that has to go their way, and it's like kind of a mindset of perfectionism, and they cannot tolerate any deviation whatsoever. It's like, for example, if there's a box of cookies, and you're holding it down and saying, here you go, sweetheart, which one do you want? And they're like, this one. And they go to pick it up, and then they drop it, and it breaks. That might ruin their whole day right there, or at least half the day. And, it's not going to matter how much you try to show them there's, 15 other cookies that are identical to that one, so it's okay. It doesn't matter to them. It's like the moment of choosing that one cookie and getting able to enjoy it has been just destroyed. And, you might try to change the subject and say, hey, look, your favorite show's coming on TV. It's not going to matter. And so that's what I mean. It's like when I say things have to go their way, some people just don't grow out of this mindset. And I'm kind of sort of wondering, and this is where, I'm just expressing my thoughts for you all in case you want to go and research this yourself. I haven't done it yet, but I'm wondering if this is tied into some kind of issue with the child's psyche not developing properly with relation to their parents, or the dynamic between them and their mother. Maybe somehow that didn't go exactly right, or they experienced trauma with regards to their parents or something early on, and so they got like stuck in that toddler mindset of perfectionism. It's like their development was arrested at that moment or something like that. So I'm not, again, this is just kind of where my mind's going, but let's go ahead and just cap that off right there and keep moving forward. What happens when a person never matures beyond that mindset, I'm trying to get my air going here, okay, is they're trapped, but they don't realize they're trapped. And the reason they don't realize they're trapped is because, again, this whole expectation they have of perfection, it's both creating shame within themselves because it's unrealistic expectations of themselves, but they don't, they're so deeply enmeshed in that shame within that they have to project these unrealistic expectations of perfection outward onto the external world, so that they can point the finger out here, because then they can say everybody else and everything else falls short. They're always looking for perfection in everything, in all the things they buy. They always have to have the latest and the best and the mostest and most expensive, and in a partner it has to be the same way. They're not realistic. They don't understand that life is messy. It takes compromise and cooperation. It's just a mess, right? And they're trapped in that mess forever, until they do the work. When I say the work, I don't really know what all that entails, but they have to, they have to accept it, first of all, that there's faults, and that in itself is part of this mindset, is not being willing to accept less than perfection in their mind. And because of this, they're running from karma. They're running from responsibility, accountability, and consequence. And so, yes. And so, like I said, the inability to take responsibility, of course, leads to projection. And remember that projection is distancing oneself, putting the faults and inferior aspects of oneself out there, so that it creates as much distance as possible from oneself, so that they can feel like they're better, right? They're so arrogant and haughty. And so, yes. And I put creates a perception of persecution. I don't even know why I put that there. I feel like I didn't finish my thoughts. So, as we're going to read through Campbell's book a little bit here and there today, we're going to see that the key is God's mercy, which leads to what he calls dissolving the ogre aspect of God, right? And we're going to get more into that. I just want to go ahead and put that in your mind, plant that seed, and let it start creating that frame, that reference to absorb everything from, okay? Essentially, by going through this process we're going to read about today, it's going to allow a person, or it would allow a person, to embrace imperfections in the light of humility and God's grace, because that is what creates a freeing and peaceful default to operate from, to operate in this human experience from, right? Who wouldn't want peace, you know? Well, somebody who's on the run constantly, they've got to create their own, in the book, one of the terms used is delusions. They have to live in a delusion, essentially, and then try to project that onto others and get them to buy into it, you know? What's interesting is, you can look at this like, why would someone refuse God's mercy and refuse a peaceful life? You know, one thing to consider is pride. And if you think about it, you know, that was what, that was the main motivating factor for Satan being kicked out of heaven, right? And so he wanted to be perfect apart from God. And that's a really key point today in our message. So let's go ahead and get into the book, and then we'll come back and wrap up some closing thoughts. And I hope you're doing well today. I don't remember if I said that, but I hope you're having a good day today. All right, so this is section 4 of chapter 2, called Atonement with the Father. So it opens by saying, the bow of God's wrath is bent, and the arrow made ready on the string, and justice bends the arrow at your heart. And what he's doing, he's giving some pretty chunky excerpts from, let's see, from writings from Jonathan Edwards. And the book he references is actually from 1742, and it's called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Okay, so this is that whole hellfire and brimstone type of preaching. You know, a lot of people feel like that in itself creates trauma, and I'm certainly not trying to assert, you know, any absolute truths here or project my own beliefs onto you. That's for you to decide. Remember, my goal is always to get the wheels turning for you, but that's kind of the lens that he's referencing here. The way some people perceive God is only in that manner, as an angry, vengeful, unforgiving God, right? He mentions, I mean, and I'm certainly, like I said, this is a very long section, and there's a whole lot here. It's very, very rich, but I'm just going to hit the highlights. Some examples. He mentions terms like the floods of God's vengeance, inconceivable fury, omnipotent power, the flames of wrath. And then here's a little section here I'm going to read to you. It says, God's mere pleasure, which defends the sinner from the arrow, the flood, and the flames, is termed in the traditional vocabulary of Christianity as God's mercy, and the mighty power of the Spirit of God, by which the heart is changed. That is God's grace. So that's the key, right? To not feeling that condemnation and conviction, is accepting that gift of his mercy and grace, is what's being shared here. So the next section, if you have this version here, the paperback on page 129, it says, for the ogre aspect, remember, a lot of myths and fairy tales and folklore have characters that are ogres, right? For the ogre aspect of the father is a reflex of the victim's own ego, derived from the sensational nursery scene that has been left behind but projected before, and the fixating idolatry of that. Okay, I wasn't supposed to read all that. Pedagogical non-thing is itself the fault that keeps one steeped in a sense of sin. You see what I'm saying? That fixating idolatry of being rigid basically in those beliefs, this ogre aspect of the father. And remember, he's saying that it's actually a reflex of the victim's own ego. It's like projecting onto God that anger, that wrath, projecting one's own wrath onto God and viewing God now from that lens. That's how I'm making sense of this, right? Which is really interesting. It says that in itself is the fault that keeps one steeped in a sense of sin, sealing the potentially, I did the quotes here in my notes, the potentially adult spirit, remember this is indicative of an immature psyche, from a better, balanced, more realistic view of the Father, and therewith of the world. Atonement, or, and he's got in parentheses, at one-ment, consists in no more than the abandonment of that self-generated double monster, the dragon thought to be God, which is superego, and the dragon thought to be sin, or repressed id. But this requires an abandonment of the attachment to ego itself, right? And pride is going to prevent abandoning ego, right? Or an ego death. And that is what is difficult. One must have a faith that the Father is merciful. Faith is key. Faith is important. It serves a purpose. And then a reliance on that mercy. Therewith, the center of belief is transferred outside of the bedeviling God's tight, scaly ring, and the dreadful ogres dissolve. So it's getting a more balanced and full understanding of God, right? Not just totally and only just a vindictive, angry, vengeful God. So then he goes into some really interesting stories that you might want to look up if you don't have the book. He talks about the twin warriors of the Navajo. Very interesting. And then he also, his footnotes are super interesting here. He goes into talking about the dance of it's Siva, but I thought it was Shiva. Maybe it's spelled differently, but there's a footnote on that. And then also myths and symbols in Indian art and civilization. He explains the symbolism, right? And it's very, very interesting. The twin warriors of the Navajo as well. And then I think that's all here. And then yes, the unhappy exploit of the lad Phaethon, Phaethon, described in a famous tale of the Greeks. And then he talks about climbing a steep path. There's always a path. There's always a mountain. There's always some kind of water, or, ring of water or fire. Chariots involved. And then we have, the serpent character, of course. So very, very interesting. And then, yeah, I'm trying to find the next story that's referenced here. They kind of all flow together. He makes a quote here that's really interesting. It says, in regards to that Phaethon story, Phaethon, it says, this tale of indulgent parenthood illustrates the antique idea that when the roles of life are assumed by the improperly initiated, chaos supervenes. So I take this as like parents that are immature themselves. It's kind of like, you're going to have that generational curse perpetuated at that point, because it's like, forgive them, they know not what they do. It's that whole, it's just perpetuated totally unconsciously, handed down from generation to generation, this trauma of creating chaos, of projecting, of unrealistic expectations, of this false belief that life should be perfect apart from God, which is not even possible in this reality. So we're going to talk about what he says about that right there. And so, yes, In a minute, he goes into talking about different rituals and things like that that are pretty bizarre. But right now, I'm trying to give you guys the context. Let me just go ahead and read this, and we'll talk about it. I've highlighted on page 136. Ideally, the invested one has been divested of his mere humanity and is representative of an impersonal cosmic force. So this is like the hero who is or has done the work, is doing or has done the work. This is kind of like a quick summary of that, essentially, right? The invested one has been divested of his mere humanity, and is representative of an impersonal cosmic force. That's like embodying that divine spark, right? Just because this person has been expanded to see the full truth of things. Everything's been put in perspective, right? He is the twice born. He has become himself the Father. And I'm going to frame this from the lens, remember, archetypal psychology personifies different aspects of the psyche, so just consider that in this illustration here. And he is competent, consequently, now to enact himself the role of the initiator, the guide, the sun door, through whom one may pass from the infantile illusions of good and evil, right? Which is the whole tree in the Garden of Eden, right? With the apple. One may pass from the infantile illusions of good and evil to an experience of the majesty of cosmic law. We're going to talk about it. Purged of hope and fear, and at peace in the understanding of the revelation of being. So that's like just a quick summary of the goal, right? So this is now the sections where he's talking about all these ceremonies that that children, especially young men and boys, go through with the elders in their tribe, and it's it's part of just acknowledging the maturity process physically, and it's shocking, some of it. I'll just tell you that. So he says throughout the ancient world such myths and rites abounded. And he starts talking about the different stories of deaths and resurrections, and how that looks different throughout different cultures and belief systems and structures. So I want you to think about free will in this next section I'm going to read to you on page 145. First of all, he's got an image of this, I guess it's a sculpture from Argentina called the Universal Father, Viracocha, weeping. And we're going to talk about that. And it doesn't look human whatsoever, the sculpture. But it's like a sun at the top, and I'm sure you guys can Google it and look at it. But it says, these are differing views of the same dreadful providence. Now, let me give you some reference on this, right? So, right before what I just read to you guys and what I'm going to read to you guys, he's talking about a folktale of East Africa, actually. And he's describing what they call the great chief, which is death, appearing to them. And it says one side of him was beautiful, and the other side was rotten and horrible and had wounds and, just gross. And it's described in detail. And the point is that there's two sides, right, to this powerful being. So keep that in mind. So he says, these are differing views of the same dreadful providence. In him are contained, and from him proceed the contradictions, good and evil, death and life, pain and pleasure, boons and deprivation. As the person of the sun door, he is the fountainhead of all the pairs of opposites. With him are the keys of the unseen. In the end, unto him will be your return. Then will he show you the truth of all that ye did. I like how I don't know that I would say I like it, but it's interesting that he says all that ye did. In other words, it's almost like pointing out right there that we're not even, remember, in the Bible it says, Jesus said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. There's that unconscious part of our psyche that plays a big part in us creating our own reality and blaming others, and wanting to point the finger out there. And for a lot of people, and maybe all of us to some degree, we may not even know a lot of what we did in this world because it was perpetuated from some part of our unconsciousness, and it may not be revealed to us until we get to the next place, beyond the human experience. So I just found that really interesting. So he talks about the mystery of the apparently self-contradictory Father. Notice the term apparently. Okay? The apparently self-contradictory Father. This is where you have to really be willing to expand your mind and embrace paradox, divine paradox. So I'm going to read to you a good bit here from page 146. It says, Viracocha, therefore, in this manner of manifesting his ubiquity, participates in the character of the highest of the universal gods. Furthermore, his synthesis of sun god and storm god is familiar. We know it through the Hebrew mythology of Yahweh, in whom the traits of two gods are united. Yahweh, a storm god, is familiar. I'm sorry. I went back up a sentence. Yahweh, a storm god, and also El, a solar. It is apparent in the Navajo personification of the father of the twin warriors. It is obvious in the character of Zeus, as well as in the thunderbolt and halo of certain forms of the Buddha image. The meaning is that the grace that pours into the universe through the sun door is the same as the energy of the bolt that annihilates and is itself indestructible. The delusion shattering light of the imperishable is the same as the light that creates. Or again, in terms of a secondary polarity of nature, the fire blazing in the sun glows also in the fertilizing storm. The energy behind the elemental pair of opposites, fire and water, is one and the same. Really interesting, isn't it? And then he gets into the paradox, what I call the divine paradox. It says all life is sorrowful, right? All life is sorrowful. Is combined with the world begetting affirmative of the Father, life must be. In full awareness of the life anguish of the creatures of his hand, in full awareness of the life anguish of the creatures of his hand, in full consciousness of the roaring wilderness of pains, the brain-splitting fires of the deluded, self-ravaging, lustful, angry universe of his creation. This divinity acquiesces in the deed of supplying life to life. To withhold, this is important here, I highlighted this, to withhold the seminal waters would be to annihilate. Yet, to give them forth is to create this world that we know. For the essence of time is flux, dissolution of the momentarily existent. And the essence of life is time. In his mercy, in his love for the forms of time, this demiurgic man of men yields countenance to the sea of pangs. But in his full awareness of what he is doing, the seminal waters of the life that he gives are the tears of his eyes, just like in that statue that I was talking about. If you want to look him up online, it's Viracocha, Viracocha. Yes, I'm going to expand a little bit here on page 147. The paradox of creation. The coming of the forms of time out of eternity is the germinal secret of the Father. It can never be quite explained. Therefore, in every system of theology, there is an umbilical point, an Achilles tendon, which the finger of Mother Life has touched, where the possibility of perfect knowledge has been impaired, right? It's just really interesting. I'm going to stop there. Essentially, he's talking about the hero. It says, we have this blind spot because the possibility of perfect knowledge has been impaired, right? It's just part of this. We can't see the whole picture in this human form. So it says the hero transcends life with its peculiar blind spot and for a moment rises to a glimpse of the source. He beholds the face of the Father and understands the two are atoned. So, about to wrap up this little section here I'm reading to you. It says, look on everyone that is proud and bring him low. Tread down the wicked in their place. Hide them in the dust together and bind their faces in secret. Then I will also confess unto thee that thine own hand can save thee. I'm reminded again of how we have that divine spark within us of creation, but we don't realize it. So when we're stuck in this mindset of fixated on the negative, feeling like things are out of our control, we have to remember this tremendous force that is flowing through us, this creative force that's going to flow through us, whether it's through our conscious awareness or our unconscious part of our psyche. It's still playing a part in creating our reality. And so most of us work at becoming more and more conscious. We want to learn and grow, and then we have those who don't. They don't want to embrace that we actually have an impact on our own lives. They don't want to accept karma and consequences, right? Yes. So, and then he goes at the very end of this section. He talks about a lyric from the East European ghettos. It says, O Lord of the universe, I will sing thee a song. Where canst thou be found? And where canst thou not be found? Where I pass, there art thou. Where I remain, there too thou art. Thou, and only thou. Doth it go well? 'Tis thanks to thee. Doth it go ill? Ah, 'tis also thanks to thee. Right? And then it continues on a little bit more. So essentially, I just want you to think on this, right? Free will is a large part of the divine design, and it's kind of like, how can this existence that we're in right now, how can it even be a thing unless it's apart from God, right? It's kind of like it has to be that way. And so, and it is, you know, in a lot of ways tragic and sad, but it's kind of like goes back to that old saying, you know, life is what you make it to some degree, right? There's some things out of our control, but there's a lot within our control. So remember that narcissistic people who are unwilling to take responsibility, who create chaos and who exploit others and who are very selfish and have unrealistic standards and things like that, they're essentially angry that perfection isn't attainable separate from God. That's how I view that, right? They're always looking for something better. You know, the thing is, if we're willing to expand ourselves enough, to learn and grow enough, to truly have the capacity to embrace this divine paradox, that this is just the way it has to be, that nobody's perfect and nothing is perfect, and it, you know, it's just the way it is, and it doesn't mean you have to self-condemn, and it doesn't mean that you have to, you know, point the finger, that, you know, to accept that we're all going to face consequences. How else do you learn, right? It's all about how you look at it, you know. I mean, we can be grateful that we even had another day on this earth to learn something, right? To improve, but just, you know, within reason, understanding that we're never going to reach perfection in this human form, right? And that's just part of the divine design. We were made, I believe, to not go it alone, but to go it with purpose, because we're intentionally seeking alignment with that inner guiding light. And it's also crucial that we look for others who are doing the same, and that we find our own people in that way, right? And that inner guidance is going to help us with that too. And so that to me is a big part of what brings peace in this existence. And I just hope that I've given you a lot to think about today. I hope that I've gotten the wheels turning, and I just thank you so much for coming along for the message. I hope that you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you again very soon.